Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, I can't help but sit here and wonder whether the accusations against your father could possibly hurt you if you're running for president.
The legacy that the current president is leaving to the Brazilian people is misery, a lack of education, and the active support of criminality.
How would you handle your country that is dealing with narco-terrorism?
I am tired of seeing my country being handed over into the hands of criminals. I intend to toughen the law, build prisons, and keep these criminals in prison longer. President Trump can be sure that starting from the year 2027, Brazil will have a president who is an ally of the United States.
If you skim the headlines about Brazil's upcoming election in the international press, the picture looks clear. A fierce, inch-by-inch fight between two names, Lula and Flavio Bolsonaro. A fight between Brazil's sitting president and the son of former President Jair Bolsonaro. A fight between left and right, between a progressive who rose from poverty and a conservative proud of Trump's endorsement and his own famous surname, the surname Bolsonaro. The outcome, we are told, is unpredictable, but the bigger picture is supposed already settled. An American-style culture war between right and left, between those ostensibly pro-Christians and others covertly anti-Christians, between the defense of family values against progressive, egalitarian ideas. My point here is that this mainstream description as an ideological horse race competition is mostly a deceptive read, based on a superficial understanding of the polls and to have influenced by the rhetoric of the two main campaigns. A deceptive read that both the Lula and the Flavio Bolsonaro camps are more than happy to endorse, since it highlights the names of their candidates. But such deceptive read doesn't reflect how most Brazilians actually see this election, which really cannot be understood as an American-style culture war. This election really isn't a contest between two parties and two ideologies, as in America, Democrats against Republicans. And the best clues to foresee the final result of this election lie somewhere else entirely, as I will show. The first misconception to clear up for anyone analyzing the race from inside Brazil, watching the key players closely on a daily basis, it has already become clear and settled that Flavio Bolsonaro's bid turns to a lost cause. He no longer has the means, the timing, the opportunities to attract the independent voters he would desperately need to overcome Lula. Election day is just 2 months away on October, and Flavio has already burned through all ammunition he had. He is now stuck and seems somewhat resignated. To start with, Flavio has no real accomplishments to brag about. His entire political career has been on his father's shadow, and inside Brazil he is known much more for corruption scandals, followed by investigations that keep stalling thanks to political interference, as it happened during Jair Bolsonaro's mandate, when an investigation about Flavio was stalled on the STF. And Flavio is also known for a long list of shady friendships from the darker corners of Rio de Janeiro's political underworld. Flavio Bolsonaro has never been known for any influential statements, manifestos, votes in Congress, or original ideas for Brazil's problems. Flavio has held legislative office since 2003, first elected at 22 years old, purely on his father's backing, and his legislative record is mediocre, to put it kindly. Meanwhile, a string of his former friends and associates have been on the radar of police and justice over the years. Fabrício Queiroz, who worked for Flávio for years, Adriano da Nóbrega, a hitman from Rio de Janeiro that Flávio awarded a medal, Cláudio Castro, ex-governor, former governor of Rio de Janeiro, associated to Flavio Bolsonaro, Márcio Canella, another politician from Rio de Janeiro, Rodrigo Bacelar, TH Joias, politicians from Rio de Janeiro associated with Flavio Bolsonaro, some friends of him, Daniel Vorcaro, and so on. Regarding the late hitman Adriano da Nóbrega, a feared killer active in Rio de Janeiro, who worked for major criminal figures, here is something that the softball misleading interview that Flavio gave to PragerU, and I put an excerpt from that interview at the beginning of this video. That interview won't tell you that both Adriano's mother and his then wife worked for Flavio for years as parliamentary aides, and Flavio himself awarded Adriano the Tiradentes Medal, the most prestigious honor given by the state of Rio de Janeiro. Besides that, a widely circulated WhatsApp audio in which Flavio greeted former banker turned criminal Daniel Vorcaro, who acted like a gangster and now sits behind bars in Brasília. Flavio greeted him as my friend and my brother, and this audio that landed like a bomb on Flavio's already fragile candidacy. Flavio's audio was sent on late 2025, and it was leaked to the press from the investigations on Daniel Vorcaro activities.
Irmão, preferi te mandar o áudio aqui para você ouvir com calma. Bom, aqui a gente está passando por um dos momentos mais difíceis da nossa vida, né? Não sei como é que vai ser daqui para frente, como é que isso tudo vai acabar, mas tá na mão de Deus aí. E você também, eu sei que você está passando por um momento dificílimo aí também, essa confusão toda, você sem saber exatamente como é que vai caminhar isso tudo. E apesar de você ter dado liberdade, Daniel, de a gente te cobrar, eu fico sem graça de ficar te cobrando, tá? Mas, enfim, não... é porque tá num momento muito decisivo aqui do filme. E como tem muita parcela para trás, cara, tá todo mundo tenso e fico preocupado aqui com o efeito ao contrário do que a gente sonhou pro filme, né? Imagina a gente dando calote num Jim Caviezel, num Cyrus, os caras, pô, renomadíssimos lá no cinema americano, mundial. Pô, ia ser muito ruim, né? Todo efeito positivo que a gente tem certeza que vai vir com esse filme pode ter o efeito elevado a -1 aí, cara. Então, se você puder me dar um toque, uma posição ainda, né? Porque a gente precisa saber o que faz, cara, da vida, porque já tem muita conta para pagar esse mês, e o mês seguinte também, e agora que é a reta final, que a gente não pode vacilar, não pode não honrar com os compromissos aqui, porque senão a gente perde tudo, cara, tudo contrato, perde ator, perde diretor, perde equipe, perde tudo. Podemos dar um toque aí, irmão? Desculpa o áudio longo aí, tá? Um abração, fica com Deus, cara.
Not long after this, Michele Bolsonaro, wife of the imprisoned former president Jair Bolsonaro, and Flavio's stepmother, and herself an enormously influential figure among evangelicals in Brazil, she publicly accused Flavio of being harsh and disrespecting her.
Voltando ao Flávio, telefonei para ele, tentei algumas vezes, mas ele não atendeu. Algumas horas depois da postagem, ele retornou a ligação. Mas, sinceramente, para falar o que ele me falou, seria melhor se ele não tivesse ligado. Ele foi muito ríspido, me desrespeitou e me maltratou ao telefone. E eu não tinha feito nada contra ele. Ele disse que seria melhor eu ficar fora das decisões do partido. Disse que eu havia chegado ontem e não entendia nada de política. Diante dessa humilhação, eu disse a ele que estava tudo bem. Entendi que ele não queria o meu apoio ou que este era insignificante. E então eu me recolhi. Fiquei na minha e assim permaneci.
That was a genuinely heavy blow to Flavio's beat. Over the following weeks, the leaders of the parties that backed Jair Bolsonaro's 2022 candidacy began distancing themselves from Flavio and declined to endorse him this time around. They chose to stay neutral on this election, already expecting another Lula mandate and unwilling to be regarded as enemies of President Lula. Flavio couldn't even land a running mate from one of the other major Brazilian parties, despite trying hard. In every election, the candidates try to make alliances with other parties and then these coalitions of parties that come to power when a candidate wins, but Flavio couldn't engage any other party to his cause except his own party, the PL. Flavio was eager to bring on a woman as his vice presidential pick, since he consistently pulls poorly with women, but Flavio wasn't able to enlist any prominent female figure. Even former Bolsonaro agriculture minister Teresa Cristina, who is very popular in Brazil, she wasn't allowed by her own party to join his ticket. She isn't of Flavio Bolsonaro's party, and her party didn't allow her to run with Flavio as his vice president. The same goes for major Brazilian businessmen who long supported the Bolsonaro family and now keep their distance from Flavio. He seems useless and kind of toxic for them, as many of them now expect a new Lula's mandate. Flavio's very public appearance alongside President Trump and his apparent connection to the American leader through his brother Eduardo Bolsonaro have become a serious liability for his campaign, especially since Trump reimposed steep tariffs on a range of Brazilian products a few weeks ago. Eduardo Bolsonaro, Flavio's brother, was recently sentenced to prison by the STF, by the Brazilian Supreme Court, and he now lives as an expatriate in the US. A few weeks ago, President Trump gave Eduardo a green card as a retribution for defending American interests and tariffs against the Brazilian government. Both Lula's campaign and much of Brazil's mainstream media have painted Flavio and Eduardo as traitors to Brazilian interests. Eduardo's actions have been ostensibly in favor of American interests against Brazilian interests, and Flavio didn't act so ostensibly, so openly, but he is Eduardo's brother and they are very close. And it hasn't helped that Eduardo himself publicly celebrated when Trump first slapped on the tariffs back in 2025.
Para a Segunda Guerra Mundial, o que os Estados Unidos fez com o Japão? Lança uma bomba atômica em Hiroshima para demonstrar força. Qual foi a reação do Japão naquela época? Falou, olha, nós aqui somos patriotas, isso é uma interferência dos Estados Unidos aqui no nosso país, vamos resistir, fora Yankees. Qual foi a consequência 3 dias depois? Uma segunda bomba atômica em Nagasaki. Para aí depois, sim, haver, no dia 16 de agosto de 1945, portanto, 2 semanas depois da primeira bomba, haver uma rendição formal por parte do Japão. Então, essa situação tem que ser encarada como uma negociação de guerra, assim, onde nós não estamos em condições normais, nós não estamos em condições de exigir nada por parte do governo Trump. Ele vai fazer o que ele quiser, independente da nossa vontade.
Mas tem um cara nos Estados Unidos que eu acho que não vai reconhecer a eleição brasileira. Vocês vão ter saudades do tempo em que a tarifa Moraes era de apenas 50%.
So the seemingly tight race between Lula and Flavio in the polls doesn't stem from either man's popularity. This tight race stems from sky-high rejection numbers for both. Each of the two is rejected by more than half of the voters. But there is a crucial difference here. Lula is the sitting president. He has been in and out of power for the last 20 years. And unlike Flavio, Lula is a shrewd, seasoned politician who has already won 5 presidential elections. either directly or through his proxy, Dilma Rousseff. Flavio's seemingly high polling numbers should be best understood as a reflexive expression of Lula's political fatigue rather than genuine support for Flavio. Years of accumulated corruption scandals under PT governments, the persistently poor quality of public service for most Brazilians, and a general sense of stagnation and decline have convinced a large share of voters that they have had enough of PT, of the Worker Party's government. Anyone who makes voters believe a transfer of power is near and possible automatically becomes a front-runner against Lula. That's exactly the position Governador Tarcísio de Freitas, an ally of the Bolsonaro family, he was in a few months ago. He was leading the polls against Lula because most people are unsatisfied with Lula. And here's something you rarely hear in mainstream coverage of Brazilian politics. Roughly a third of voters have skipped the polls in both the first or second rounds in recent presidential elections. It's very likely that a good chunk of the people telling pollsters they will vote for Flavio are really just dissatisfied with Lula and the political system at large, and won't vote at all for anyone. They will stay at home on the election day. Meanwhile, most of Lula's voters are poor and rely on one or more of the many social programs Lula has created over the last 20 years, and this large bloc generally believes they need to keep the Workers' Party in power to preserve the welfare benefits they depend on. That's a vote that has nothing to do with ideology or even personal support for the president. That's a strong reason to doubt the supposed parity between the two frontrunners. Lula's voters have a strong existential reason to show up and actually vote for him. Flavio voters don't have such a strong reason, and most of them no longer trust him anyway. Flavio is not trusted among their own voters because he's not Jair Bolsonaro, he's his son, and his record is poor and bad. One important thing to note is that neither the Flavios nor the Lula's campaign has put forward much in the way of concrete proposals or new ideas for Brazil's pressing problems. Both rely mostly on voters' identification with the candidate himself and his family, and the candidate's family in the case of Flavio, regardless of any real prospect of political effectiveness. So it's a campaign mostly based on personal connection to the candidates and not on a rational base, on rational ideas in the debate of ideas. New ideas and proposals have come exclusively from the three candidates tied for third place in the polls: Renan Santos, Romeu Zema, and Ronaldo Caiado. Renan Santos is someone who runs for office for the first time. He just created his own party, and he's inspired by Milei. He wants to be the Brazilian Milei. Romeu Zema is the former governor of Minas Gerais, important state, and Ronaldo Caiado, the former governor of Goiás, another important state. And Ronaldo Caiado himself ran against Lula in the first election in the 80s. Renan Santos has been the most outspoken critic of both Lula and the Bolsonaro family, and of the political system at large. Some polls place him clearly ahead of Zema and Caiado, and his bold campaign has outnumbered even Flavio and Lula according to some internet metrics. Santos' videos on the internet have consistently outnumbered Lula's videos and Flavio Bolsonaro videos on YouTube, on Instagram. He's much more active and popular in the internet than any other candidate. All these three minor candidates have taken a more disruptive approach to the race, pushing for fundamental changes to Brazilian law and governance, to reining rampant crime, corruption, and economic and technological stagnation. The technological stagnation is a very serious issue in Brazil, and the main campaigns of Lula and Flavio hardly make a point of this. And yet the polls and the broader public mood suggests the vast majority of Brazilians simply aren't willing to listen to them or to their new ideas. People are dissatisfied, but they are not open to new ideas, to listen to other politicians other than Flavio and Lula. And why it's happening? And here's my take. This isn't really a contest between two leaders, Lula and Flavio. This year's election feels more like a giant survey of just how disillusioned, truly disheartened Brazilian voters and the population at large have become with the political system and the country's future. So it's not really a contest between two great leaders, but it has become a way of people expressing their disbelief with the country, with the situation of the country, their dissatisfaction with the situation of the country. It's actually like a referendum on institutional exhaustion and political disengagement, not an ideological battle or intellectual horse race at all. And let me state something clearly. It's extremely, very unlikely that President Lula won't be sworn in again on January 2027. There is nothing on the horizon suggesting he might lose. But Lula's second election, just 2 months away from today, as I see, would hardly be called a political victory. In a recent poll, most respondents said the president doesn't deserve another term. His election will owe far more to the opposition's inability to rally around a solid candidate, to the cringe-inducing dependency of most of that opposition on the Bolsonaro family, and to the unwillingness of far too many voters to even entertain new ideas or trust any politician at all. So it won't be a victory of a popular leader, but it will be an expression of the disengagement of the society, and the people are unsatisfied with Lula, and still they don't want to place a new alternative on the office. For most of his term, Lula's re-election wasn't seen as likely. That unchanged on Jair Bolsonaro forced his supporters to fall in line behind his inexperienced, scandal-plagued son late on 2025. It's widely expected that Lula will skip most of the television debates, and just as expected that he won't bring any bold new proposal to the table to bolster his candidacy. Most of his political messaging boils down to highlighting Flavio's obvious weakness and Flavio's alleged closeness to President Trump, who is currently slapping new tariffs on Brazil and threatening the PIX payment system. Lula's core strategy, and a clever strategy, seems to be framing the elections as a contest between himself and President Trump, between Brazilian interests and American interests, casting Flavio as little more than a Trump's proxy operating inside Brazilian politics. Lula is moving the focus of the election to this dispute between Brazil and the United States, and by doing so, he doesn't need to propose anything new, to bring new ideas for Brazil's problems. and he just stands as a defensor, theoretically as a defensor of Brazil's interests against Flavio, who is portrayed as a defensor of American interests. So the election is reduced to a dispute between American interests versus Brazilian interests, and Lula positioning himself as the defensor of Brazilian interests. He doesn't need, by doing so, to propose any new idea and to bring any solution to Brazil's problems. Lula's fast approaching, maybe easiest ever victory on this October won't arrive with the bang of a wide celebration or loud protests from the opposition. The opposition is disengaged. But his victory will likely come with the whimper of dismay and indifference.